He initiated a major literacy program. You know what? I think teaching people to read and write is a good thing. The truth is the truth, and that's what happened in the first years of the Castro regime.
It's what he believes, and it's unacceptable to our community. It's unacceptable to anyone in our country.
Does it disqualify him to be president?
Well, that's for the voters to decide. But as far as I'm concerned, he's way off.
Well, Democrats in South Florida don't much like the literacy program of Fidel Castro or that Bernie Sanders brings it up. But Bernie Sanders is the frontrunner of this race, and he will be under attack on that debate stage. 7 candidates, as you look at them: Joe Biden, Mike Bloomberg, Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, Bernie Sanders, Tom Steyer, and Elizabeth Warren. Now, a lot of the conventional wisdom in Democratic circles is that Bernie Sanders is a real problem and that he might not win against Donald Trump. Peter Hamby with the Vanity Fair a couple weeks ago wrote a piece. I'm just going to read a little bit of it. Everything about Sanders, his ideas, his stubborn dogma, his sometimes kooky supporters, his contempt for green room culture and party circuit is completely foreign to the intellectual and cultural fabric of Washington. In that universe, the claim that Sanders is unelectable is more or less gospel. Some Trump advisors are worried about Sanders' strengths, his populist appeal, perceived authenticity, his durable popularity with the same white non-college voters who voted for Trump. Democrats fretting about the prospect of nominating Sanders should consider for a moment how the few years in American politics have exposed the frailty of conventional wisdom and incremental thinking. They might also consider a Xanax. Instead of asking if Sanders is unelectable, ask another question. What if Sanders is actually the most electable Democrat? In the age of Trump, hyperpartisanship, institutional distrust, and social media, Sanders could be examined as a candidate almost custom-built to go head-to-head with Trump this year. That was a few weeks ago before Sanders went on a roll. What about all of this? Let's bring in our panel. Charles Hurt, opinion editor of the Washington Times. Mo Alethi, executive director of the Georgetown Institute of Politics. And Jonah Goldberg, editor-in-chief of the Dispatch. Mo, what do you think of that?
Peter Hamby's onto something here. Look, I think Bernie Sanders is going to have a unique set of challenges should he be the nominee. But I don't disagree with Peter that we are in a different era. One of the ways Donald Trump won was by tapping into a sense of grievance amongst a whole lot of people out there, a populist sense of grievance, and using that to turn out voters that we haven't seen yet. That's the rationale of the Sanders campaign, that they can tap into a populist sense of grievance and turn out a whole new group of people. The first 3 states, we haven't seen him do that. He hasn't expanded the electorate in the first 3 states. And I think comments like that one on the literacy program in Cuba might be a challenge in some places. But then again, you know, what the heck do any of us know? We were all saying there's no way Donald Trump can win 4 years ago, and he proved us wrong. Don't count him out.
Joe Biden is in a position in South Carolina where he really needs a win, has to have one. He's got an ad against Bernie that's airing in South Carolina now.
Bernie Sanders told fellow senators he'd take on Obama. When it comes to building on President Obama's legacy, Bernie Sanders just can't be trusted.
The question is how Joe Biden can be trusted on the debate stage and his previous performance and what tonight could bring. I mean, clearly it's going to bring fireworks.
Yeah, no, everyone's going to empty out the storehouse of ammo on everybody, I think. But look, Biden, the basic problem with Biden is he increasingly sounds like one of those bad lip reading videos you see on the internet where words that do not go correctly in the order in which he's saying them come out of his mouth with alarming frequency.
I mean, today with the U.S. Senate, running for the U.S. Senate.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, he's talking about getting arrested visiting Nelson Mandela. I mean, it's like, where's the nurse to rein him in? And that's his real problem. If he could come out and reassure people with more than shouting and anger that he was fully in control of himself, I think he'd be in a much better position. But there's a nervous-making aspect to his candidacy at this point. Like, maybe he just can't go the distance, and I think Democratic voters are picking up on that.
All right, here is Bernie Sanders from 60 Minutes and Representative Clyburn.
What democratic socialism is about is saying, let's use the federal government to protect the interests of working families.
Yeah. Anybody who refers to themselves as a democratic socialist, that word has always had really dire consequences throughout South Carolina.
You know, usually endorsements don't mean a lot. Representative Clyburn's endorsement means a lot, actually, in South Carolina. And if he does pull the trigger for Biden and gets behind him, maybe that moves him across the finish line.
Yeah, and also the sort of non-endorsements, like the one from Donna Shalala, you know, what people are saying, and Mike Bloomberg, what people are saying about Bernie Sanders right now. And I know that, you know, people come together once a nominee is picked, but I have a hard time imagining how these people come back around and support Bernie Sanders after some of the things that they've said. Raises another big question for me. You know, where is Barack Obama? He risks having his entire legacy, you may not agree with it, but he risks having his entire legacy being destroyed by this guy, whether he wins or he loses, and he's sitting on the sidelines. I don't get it. But you know, the similarities between Trump and Sanders is that they both reveal the dissatisfaction of regular voters with their parties. Huge anti-establishment fervor, and I think it's real. And I
think about that. That's the populist left and the populist right. The traditional establishment has faded into oblivion.